So I'm gonna go ahead and talk about some Guardian Crystal setups, but I do want to preface this by saying that ultimately, there is no one best way to build for BDO. That's really the best part about this game, that everyone might have some different put different stats higher or more important than others. So take from this what you will, but please do not take this as an absolute. I understand if some of you guys may not agree with some of the crystal setups I mentioned in this video, and that's totally fine. Whatever works for you works for you. So do what you want to do, and just, hopefully this video can help some of you guys, but ultimately choose whatever type of stats that you want the most. Hey guys, how y'all doing? Hope you guys are having a good day, good night, good evening, whatever time of day it is. Hope you guys are having a good one. So today's gonna be a pretty quick and simple video. I was gonna just do a very long video showing everything, but we're gonna split it up into parts. So today we're gonna be talking about Guardian crystals and gear setups. I know a lot of people kind of believe there's one absolute way to build, and that's not entirely true. So hopefully I can kind of explain some of that in this video here. So the first build I'm going to talk about is is more of a PvE focused build. So this build is kind of if you're only strictly focusing on PvE and that's about it. If that's the case, you don't necessarily need LCARs and things of that nature. You can kind of start to put more emphasis on extra AP in your crystal slots. For example, here we have Macalod's in her helmet and chest piece. And then we put adamantine crystals in her boots. That way, if you're fighting mobs that are CCing you with knockdowns, you can use adamantine crystals to kind of prevent some of that CC. And then we keep Jin Vipers in her gloves just to make sure she has some extra accuracy. And then in her main hand, we actually put Jin Karmes. The reason behind Jin Karmes is that she gets the extra critical hit, but an extra bonus hit 5 AP. And we put 2 of them there, and then we keep corrupted crystals in our offhand. So the reason behind using Karme crystals and the Macalods is that she gets a bonus of 20 AP just from these alone, just from having 4 Macalods and and 2 Karmes. That's bonus 20 AP. Which, if you look at the AP tiers or the AP brackets, that's sometimes more than a single AP bracket bonus. If you look at, say, 265, 268 to 269, that AP jump is only 15, whereas with these crystals you'll be getting an extra 20. If you look at, say, 83 to 101, that's about 18 AP bonus, whereas again here with these crystals you're getting an extra 20. Now remember, this is strictly a PvE focused build. If you want to do this in PvP, I mean, there's nobody telling you can't, but obviously you're gonna lose out on some defensive crystals like this. It's a super aggressive, super offensive build, so normally it's for PvE. Now in terms of armor pieces, for PvE, damage reduction is king. You want to have as much damage reduction as you can, so you typically go with Ergons and Griffins. These both will also help out with some resistance with Griffin helmet. So that's kind of why I chose these 2 armor pieces. And if you guys aren't doing in-game PvE, then it really doesn't matter because you're probably one-shotting the mobs anyways. So we're going to move on now for a more PvP focused build. There's a few different ways you can go about this. Obviously, everybody knows damage reduction is a really big important part. And we also know, for those of you guys who don't know, if you're at a point where you're like Ted armor, or just getting to a pin armor pieces, you're pretty much for any class, you're essentially going to want to have damage reduction. But then when you start to swap, when you start to get higher later on in the gear, it's going to be kind of different. So we're going to go first off just talking about when you're kind of at the point where you're just getting Ted armor, and that's about it, right? When you're getting like just Ted armor, when you're finally starting to hit that kind of range of Ted armor, at that point you don't really have enough stats of other defensive stats to really make use of them. So your biggest thing is going to be damage reduction. So having Ergons and Griffin is going to be very valuable at that point. Where it starts to be a little bit more viable to swap some items out, it's once you start to hit pin. The reason being is if you go off of Big and Shiny's tests, which I will link down below, he's posted a few times on the subreddit, kind of showing that damage reduction starts to fall off or starts to take a hit in terms of its usability. It starts to kind of get a diminishing return value at around 300 to 320 damage reduction. So if you can kind of see, it's very easy to kind of get to that point. Um, some people would still prefer to have just go straight pure damage reduction for her. And if that's what you want to do, that's totally fine. Whatever works for you is what works best. So some people will still maintain a damage reduction based setup, like so. Um, so once you kind of hit that point where you start going pin, start putting Kafirs on, it's going to be up to you how you want to do it. You can go damage reduction like so, and then in which case you would pretty much want crystals, Whom crystals in your helmets, Kobe's, Jin Kobe's in your tree armor or in your armor piece. That's kind of up for debate. It's up to you. You can use special attack evasion crystals as well. Um, those give you special attack evasion rates. But the reason why personally I prefer Kobe's instead is that on Guardian I don't really find myself getting CC'd a lot, unless I am being aggressive and I get grabbed. And so special attack evasion doesn't help me as much as some other classes would. You can pretty much stay in super armor as long as you want, or just your block. And so with that, I feel like Jin Kobe's helped me a lot more trading and blocking and whatnot because it does have extra damage reduction. And so that's why I go with Jin Kobe's instead. But it's totally up to you how you want to build. This is just I'm just offering some different types of builds you can potentially use, and then obviously take what you want from it and create your own builds. For your gloves, I pretty much put Jin Vipers. I feel like right now evasion is a huge part of the meta, and so having that extra accuracy in your gloves would help a lot. And then your boots, you have Whoms to finish off the 4-piece Whom set. Again, I put in your boots because, to be honest, you shouldn't really be getting knocked down. You have a block that is essentially 360 super armor just by pressing Q, and then you have a ton of super armor and protected skills. So if you're getting knocked down, chances are you're doing something unsafe when you shouldn't be. Now for the main hand crystals, I put Crystal of Alcar here. The reason being is for the ignore resist. You can maintain a 20% ignore resist with an extra accuracy. I believe it's extra 12 accuracy per crystal and 10% ignore resist. And for the offhand, I put corrupted crystals. She is huge. Guardian is huge with crit damage. Critical hits is literally a huge part of her skill set. It's actually part of her passive. And so with that being said, you're going to be constantly doing crits. So having that extra damage from corrupted crystals are extremely big, especially on a class like this. Now, if you get to a point where you start putting Kafirs in your armor and pin armor pieces, you can actually start to use Muskins, Liebers, and Heave helmet. And this is true with every class. Obviously, some classes can make evasion work better than others. But if you bear with me, I'm going to go over the stats and I can show you why you can still use this on Guardian. Okay, so the reason why evasion can work with Guardian, or the way to make it work with Guardian if you want the extra evasion, is pretty much Kafirs levels. Kafirs levels are so important now because you can have evasion based items and have high amounts of evasion while maintaining high amounts of damage reduction due to Kafirs levels. This is obviously a very, very late game build that some players may never reach, but the reason why it's worth bringing up is because there's quite a few players in Korea, and from what I've been told, NA players are starting to hit this point as well, to where this build is actually something reachable for them. And so this is why I'm bringing it up. This type of build has evasion based items, but still maintains about 300 to 320 damage reduction based off of your Kafirs level, which is why it's viable. It keeps your damage reduction high while giving you a high amount of evasion, so that way you can get the best of both worlds in regards to defensive stats. Again, this is a very late game item, very late game, and you don't necessarily have to use this if you don't think evasion works at all for her. That's on you. Whatever works for you, right? So if you don't think this works, you can just use damage reduction only build. But I felt like it was worth at least mentioning and bringing up this type of build, as some players are starting to reach this point in gear. Now, if you look here, I have a Valsart. I have one Tet Narc and one Tet Distortion. But the big change between the other builds is we swap to a Kudum so that it can, and with these Tet Narcs and Tet Distortion, you can still maintain 281 Awaken AP with the Kudum. And the reason behind the Kudum is one, to offer extra evasion while maintaining some high DR, but also it allows you to kind of swap your crystals around a bit. And I'll get into the crystals in 1 second. At the moment, we all know evasion is very, very useful, and that's why you can kind of afford to swap things out like this. Again, this is ultimately your preference. If you don't want to, you don't have to. You can kind of go with, like this build where it's like more pin armor, Caffers 9, but you're focusing only on damage reduction. And if you want to, that's fine. But again, this way you to have is no evasion pretty much. And so you're going, every hit is always going to land essentially on PvP. So there's kind of that. And again, you have diminishing return value after Route 320. So that's kind of why I said you can kind of mess around with more evasion based armor with high level of Caffers, because it still gives you damage reduction. Now, to moving on to crystals for this build. This build, I put Jin Harpias in the Heave Helmet. We put Jin Kobe's in the Tree Armor. You can mess around. You can change this to special attack evasion, like I said. It's just me personally, I feel like I don't really get CC'd often with her for those special attack to proc to really make use of those crystals. So that's why I use Jin Kobe's. I keep Jin Vipers in the gloves. Now the difference is right here. So the boots, we have Hooms like usual, but the main hand and offhand crystals are a little different. So I actually have one Hoom in the main hand and one Hoom in the offhand. I keep one Alcar in the main hand, and then I put a Corrupted Crystal in the offhand. So the reason behind this is we still maintain that ignored 20% because we have a Kudum and one Alcar. But this allows me to still keep at least one Alcar and one Corrupted Crystal. So I still maintain highish damage. So that's kind of why I swapped some stuff around. You don't have to. You can kind of change it up however you want. But I think in general, some of the more important crystals for Guardian are going to be Corrupted Crystals. Hooms for sure if you're having any kind of defensive build for any class. And Alcars if you have any class that does do CC and you want to try to proc that CC often, you're going to want Alcars. Jin Vipers, I believe, is just one of the most effective crystals for the current meta. In the current meta, people are building high evasion in similar fashion as what this build is showing right here. So the Jin Vipers help you to maintain high-ish accuracy to combat that evasion. Jin Kobe's, a lot of people are building special attack evasion crystals, which makes sense. But I feel personally for classes that don't really get CC'd often, they're not being used as much. You're not really making use of that special attack evasion as much as if you would make use of the extra DR and the extra HP that comes from Cobel and his crystals. For the helmet, Jin Harpias, because you're using for this specific build because it has evasion, or you'd use Hooms if you weren't using any evasion pieces, then Hooms would just be better off there. And then Hooms, like I said earlier, is just for any defensive build or any build that you want some defensive stats. Hooms are just very good for that. So those are basically the main crystal setups and the gear setups I would recommend for Guardian. I'll obviously take from this what you will and create your own builds. All right.